We good?
I
have no microphone, so I don't talk loud.
There's one right there.
Is the
No, we'll just use the
You wanna
cards.
push the
Cards.
yeah, the way it's one item.
So essentially we'll all
Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It's January 31st, 2023. Welcome to our council workshop. It is now 11:28, and I will call the meeting to order as we have a quorum. I'd first like to acknowledge that the city of Maple Ridge carries out its business under traditional and unceded territory of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Can I get a motion for approval of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes?
Mr. Mayor, can we slow down for just a moment, please?
Moved by Councillor Youssef and seconded by Councillor Carrera. All those in favor? It is unanimous. Motion is carried. Okay, are we ready to move on?
That was for the agenda, correct?
That was for the minutes.
Okay, let's move on to the citizen survey results.
Okay, we have a presentation in front of us, the 2022 citizen survey results. Staff report dated January 31st, 2023, providing results from the 2022 citizen survey. Mr. Olivier.
Good morning, Your Worship, Council. It's very nice to actually present to you in this forum again. It's been some time. And it's my pleasure to actually present the results of the 2022 citizen survey. This survey is one of the city's performance management tools that really enables us to keep a pulse on resident satisfaction with municipal services, quality of life in Maple Ridge, and a host of other metrics that really inform our day-to-day operations, but also our strategic direction. What's particularly unique about this survey is that we apply a statistical rigor to our approach, which ensures that we have statistically representative results that really capture our community's demographics. So our consultant will get into that in just a minute here. So this survey is conducted every 2 years. We do one in anticipation of the election. That way we can feed right into the development of council strategic plan. And then again, midterm to really get a sense of progress that has been made to date before we continue with the final half of council's mandate. The 2022 survey was conducted by Centis Research. And today we actually have our project lead, Vice President of Centis Research, Mary Bakika, online to take council through those results and then answer any questions that you may have. We're going to work collaboratively here and all manage the presentation, so bear with us a little bit as we get through the results. And with that, Mary, can you please take it over from here?
Thanks, Dan. How is my audio for everyone?
Coming through very clear and very loud.
Great, that's great. Okay, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for your time today. We're going to take the next 20 minutes and take you through the highlights of the citizen survey, as Dan said, and then I think that'll leave us plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. So just so everyone's on the same page, if Dan moves the slide forward, we'll just quickly, oh, sorry, there's my video. Sorry, everyone. We'll talk about the objectives and the approach so everyone understands how we went about doing the survey. Then we'll jump into the findings and then we'll sum up. And then, as I said, we should have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So as Dan has said, this is a survey that's been going on for a while. It dates back to 2003 and there's been waves almost every 2 years. The last wave was done in 2020 and then this year's wave was completed in September. Dan, if you want to move forward.
Sorry, Tracy, I've lost control of the PowerPoint here momentarily.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go.
Yeah. So again, the survey is been fairly similar through the years, but it has been refined year over year to align with the city's current priorities and informational needs. Dan, if you want to, one more time on this slide. So one of the things that we'll be talking about in the next slide in terms of approach is that in the last few ways, we've used a notification letter to an online survey methodology. And there's certainly several benefits to this approach, mainly that all households have an equal chance of being included in the study, regardless whether they have a listed timeline, regardless of if they're just a cell-only household. Online surveys, especially for this particular survey, given its length and the type of questions, really is the most suitable and just the easiest way for residents to get through the survey. And then lastly, we did include an option for residents to call in and to our toll-free line, and if they preferred, do the survey over the phone. So that was always there for those that didn't feel comfortable going online. So if we move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the approach. We mailed out 4,200 notification letters to a randomly selected group of households that we pulled from Canada Post lists. The notification letter introduced the survey, had a one-time unique link, one-time use link to the survey, as well as a QR code if they wanted to enter the survey that way. We asked that one member per household do the survey. You needed to be 18 or older, a resident of the city, and you couldn't be an elected official or an employee of the city. The survey is a little on the longer side. It took about 21 minutes on average to complete, and we ended up with 643 surveys. 8 of those were done over the phone by residents who called into our toll-free line. The letter also detailed an incentive, which was a prize draw, so an opportunity for them to enter their name to win one of several prizes, and there was quite an array of prizes, and the main report details what those prizes were. So just a little bit more on the methodology. The survey was open from September 26th to October 16th. The overall response rates based on the surveys we got back versus the invites we sent was at 15%. Now that's a little lower than we saw in previous years. That's just going to tell us that in future years we might need to up the outgo again. However, we did get a nice distribution of residents from across the various demographic groups, so that's definitely a positive. This is a survey, so it's subject to margins of error. So the total survey of 643 responses has a margin of error of plus or minus 4.2, 19 times out of 20. But probably more relevant is when you're looking and comparing 2022 results to 2020, you need a shift of about plus or minus 6 percentage points for that shift to be considered statistically significant. Again, at the 95% level of confidence. And as Dan said, we want to be able to project these results back to your total population of adult residents. So we do mathematically weight the data by age, gender, and home ownership in accordance with the population of household maintainers in the city. So we can do that. So moving on to results, we're going to start with quality of life. And the first question we asked in this area was how satisfied residents are with the quality of life. We use the scale very, somewhat, neither, somewhat dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. And you can see at the top of each of the bar of the year's results that we added together the top 2 categories of very satisfied and somewhat satisfied. And we do that for several reasons. First of all, because that's our goal. We want to focus on the goal of having everybody satisfied. And as well as when you're trending numbers and trying to look across trends, it's particularly helpful to be able to look at one number instead of a lot of numbers. So for purposes of presentation, you can see that this year, 73% of residents said they were very or somewhat satisfied with the quality of life. Now that has been trending down. We hit a high in 2014 of 84%. And now here we are 8 years later and we're at 73%. So I think the next slides will help shine a little bit of light on this. So we do ask several open-ended questions in the survey where residents can enter their responses in their own words, and then we group those into like themes, so it's easier to understand and get your head around what the findings are. So they were asked what they most like about living in Maple Ridge, and you can see the top theme on the table is access to the outdoors at 30%, and that's unchanged from 2020. The next most popular category is access to recreational activities and facilities at 21%, and that is a little lower than what we saw in 2020. And then lastly, parks rounds out the top 3 at 16%. And then there's somewhat smaller categories from there. Residents were also asked what they like least about living in Maple Ridge. And again, that was an open-ended question that we grouped into like themes. And Dan, if you want to move to the next slide. Yeah, there you go. And you can see, again, we grouped the top themes here. Homelessness, poverty, #1 concern, with 27% mentioning that. Now that is a bit lower than what we saw in 2020. Growing crime and policing not being strict enough, 22% mentioning. Traffic congestion, state of transportation rounds out the top 3 with 21% mentioning. And both those latter two, we've seen increased residents commenting on those since 2020. Secondary, oh, okay. So we also asked, that's fine. I was just going to speak to some of the secondary concerns, but let's move along because we do have a lot to cover. We also asked residents what their most pressing issue was, or what they thought was for the community. And this was a new question asked in 2022. So they could type in their most important concern and then also type in other concerns. So you can see here that homelessness, a total of 42% mentioned homelessness. 26%, it was their most important issue, or what they think is the most pressing issue for the community, along with another 16%. Addiction, drug use comes in second with 25% mentioning, and then crime, safety at 20. And then you can see some secondary concerns under that, such as needing more retail, lack of housing, traffic congestion, those sorts of things. Now, the last open-ended question we asked residents, or one of the last ones that sort of touch on quality of life, is we asked residents for the first time to, and I'll read you out the wording of the question because I think it's relevant. Please explain in general terms the type of community you would like Maple Ridge to become in the future. Give a brief description of what your vision of an ideal Maple Ridge looks like. So again, we took those comments and grouped them into like themes, so you could get a sense of what people were saying. So topping the list is a safe community with 25% mentioning that. Somewhere with more shopping and restaurants, 21%. A place that protects and promotes its green spaces, 17%. And then we have a few categories that are very similar in size. A community that supports businesses, increases employment opportunities, 15% mentioning that. A community with ample parks and rec services, 14%. And then a place with less homelessness, somewhere that takes care of homeless, 12%. And then some smaller categories under that. So we're going to move into satisfaction with municipal services. So we ask an overall question of residents. How do you feel about the municipal services? How satisfied are you with them? And again, you'll see those numbers, rolled up numbers at the top of the bars, just to give you a target and an easier way to track performance. So we've, over the years, always gotten a bit of mixed results on this question. And again, I think feedback continues to be a bit mixed. This year, 43% told us they thought services that were very good or good. We have 30% who are sitting on the fence, not able to give us an answer. And then we have 21% who think they're poor or very poor. Now, we do follow this up with the why do you say that? And we get a little bit of insight onto why people are satisfied. Basically, they don't have any complaints, or they think the services are comparable to other cities. They mentioned the good recreation. They mention a good municipal staff, workers, council. On the dissatisfaction side, topping the list is mentions of garbage collection, and then roads, maintenance, and then some people saying there's always room for improvement.
And I'll just step in here to remind council that in 2018, the city did go out to plebiscite on this garbage issue, at which time the community did come back with feedback to say not to proceed with adopting a municipal garbage service. But yet we are still seeing these trends and this feedback from the community. So a bit of context, historical context for you. Go ahead, Mary.
Thanks. So we also ask another question about municipal services in a more general sense. And we ask residents how they feel about the value of the services for the taxes they pay. And what you can see here is we get an even more mixed a bit of feedback from residents. And it has been trending downwards in terms of positivity. This year, 21% told us they feel their value for services for taxes paid is very good or good. We have 34% who are sitting on that middle fence. They're not sure if it's good or poor. And then there's 31% who feel it's poor. And then we also have another 13% that just said, don't know. They couldn't answer the question. So if you think back to the previous question where we had 30% in that neither good nor poor category. And then we, on this question, if we add up the neither, those two gray categories, neither good nor poor, and that 13% who said don't know, we have a sizable number of residents, in this case, 47%, who don't feel like they know enough to give an assessment. And that usually has to do with communication. So there's probably an opportunity there to step in and perhaps let residents know a little bit more about services and for tax dollars. If we look at the reasons why people are satisfied versus dissatisfied, again, on the positive side, they just don't have any complaints and they think it's comparable to other cities, or they say the taxes are reasonable. When it comes to those who are dissatisfied, they kind of just repeat that they think the taxes are high and they don't think they get good value. Some mention garbage collection again. And then some are making comparisons to other cities. So a big part of the survey is about rating 19 different service areas on 4 different dimensions. And those service areas are grouped into about 6 categories. So we just thought it would be helpful to show you what the residents saw on screen when they filled out the survey, so you can get a sense of how the survey was administered. So in this case, we're showing you emergency services, which is comprised of fire protection and police services. And the first question they're asked about each service is how important you think it is. And they get to rate that on a 5-point scale. Then we say, well, how satisfied are you with each of these services, where they can rate their satisfaction with the services on that same very good, good, neither poor, very poor scale. And then once they've done that, they move on to the next question for the same services, which is, do you think each of these services needs to be increased, decreased, or maintained at the current level? And then for any service that they indicate they want an increase, and in this example, you can see the respondent has said they want an increase in fire protection services. We ask them how they think that increase should be funded. And their choices are tax increase, user fees, a combo of those, reducing some other service, which they can specify the service, or they can say don't know. So there are a lot of results here, and we have a lot of trends in the full report, but in terms of getting your head around the importance and satisfaction of these 19 service areas, we've mapped them on this Harvard Square. And if I direct your attention to the top right part of the square, these are the services that are considered very high in importance, but then they're also rated very, very high when it comes to satisfaction. And you can see that emergency services such as fire protection and police services fall in this area. Recycling depot curbside collections in there, parks and playgrounds, rec facilities and programs, water, sewer, storm drainage is in there, and a little bit lower in the quadrant or the square, but still up there in that top right quadrant is library services and community-led and/or city-delivered events. Now, on the other side at the top, so the top left quadrant, those are services that are also considered very important by residents, but their satisfaction with those services doesn't quite meet the level of importance they've accorded. And 3 of the areas that are in this quadrant, you can see in its field, have to do with growth. Attracting new businesses, regulating the types of buildings that can be built, bylaw services. Also in there are cultural facilities and programs, city communications and announcements, And then you can see that sidewalks and streets and protecting streams there at the top, they're just kind of on the axes. So they're kind of riding the line between the two categories. Now, nothing is falling below the line, which is telling us that everything is important, which is not surprising. They wouldn't be in the survey if they weren't. But you can see that video streaming of city council is sitting there in that bottom quadrant, which are areas that have lower importance and lower satisfaction. However, I do need to caution that there is a large proportion of residents that can't rate this area. They said don't know. So more than likely, it's not that it's particularly unimportant. It's just they don't really know what's going on there, so they can't even rate their satisfaction with it. So in this next chart, we look at the third question in this series, which is where we ask for each of those 19 areas if you want certain service levels to be increased, maintained, or decreased. And without even looking at any numbers, you can see that there's a whole lot of green. So for the most part, people either want to see services maintained or increased. Nobody's looking for a decrease. And the only area that has a large proportion of don't know, as I referred to just previously, is that one at the very bottom of the list, video streaming of council proceedings, where a third felt they couldn't even provide an opinion. Now, at the very top of this chart, which I think is very important, there's only one area that has a majority saying, I'd like to see an increase in this area, and that's attracting new businesses and employers, with 60% wanting to see an increase. There's 4 other areas I just wanted to quickly draw your attention to, which is protecting streams and rivers. So that's about 4th down on the list. And then 2 down from that, parks and playgrounds and sports fields. And then 2 down from that, communications and announcements from the city. And then right below that, bylaw services. Those 4 areas are important because there seems to be a growing preference if we look at the trends, which we're not showing on this particular chart, but we do show it in the full report. Those 4 areas, we can start to see a growing preference for increased service levels. So for now, residents seem to be okay with maintaining current service levels, but we are seeing a larger proportion versus past years of people saying they'd like to see an increase in those areas. And again, that was protecting streams and rivers, parks and playgrounds, communications announcements from the city, and bylaw services. So the last question in the series was, how should those increases be funded? And it was remember, it was only among those, for those people who said, I'd like to see an increase in this area. So I think the first area I'd like to draw your attention to is second from the bottom, attracting new businesses and employers. Remember from the previous chart, 60% told us they'd like to see an increase in this area. But when we asked them how they'd like to fund the increase, you can see there's not a lot of consensus here, with 7% saying through a tax increase, 20% saying user fees, 24% saying a combo of that, another 18% saying we'll reduce other services, and then a full third of residents who want to see an increase saying they have no idea how to fund the increase. There are a few areas such as cultural facilities and programs, community-led or city-delivered events, and regulating the types of buildings that can be built. Those are 3 areas that have the highest proportion saying user fees is the way to fund an increase. And then you'll notice that, again, video streaming of council proceedings, communications and announcements from the city, and attracting, again, as I said earlier, attracting new businesses and employers. Those are 3 areas where the proportion who say, I don't know, even though they previously told us they'd like to see an increase, those are areas where residents cannot even come up with a choice when it comes to how to fund an increase. So one of the last opportunities residents had in the survey to voice their thoughts was just a sort of any other comments question where they could comment on anything in the survey or anything else that was on their minds. This was in the 2020 survey as well. And not surprisingly, growth was the #1 category in 2020, and it continues to be in 2022. Again, this was an open-ended question that we grouped into larger themes. And then you can see some of the sub-themes below each one. Community safety, 1 in 10 mentioning that. And then smaller categories for natural environment, intergovernmental relations, and community pride and spirit. So just to kind of sum up, and before we open it to discussion, so when it comes to quality of life in Maple Ridge, it's still positive, but it is starting to trend downwards. Residents continue to value access to the outdoors, and homelessness continues to be a top concern. When it comes to a vision for the future, residents just want a safe city, and they want more shopping and dining opportunities. When it comes to overall satisfaction with services and value for taxes paid, both those questions showed lower scores that we've seen in the past. They're trending down. So they're becoming increasingly mixed, and that was also the area where we saw a large proportion not being able to provide a rating, perhaps relating to needing more communication around what residents are getting for their tax dollars. And then in those 19 service area priorities and performance, just again, a reminder that high importance and high satisfaction is going to emergency services, recycling depot and curbside collection, the parks and playgrounds, and the water, sewer, and storm drainage. There was those areas where that were also accorded high importance, but received relatively lower performance ratings. And that was attracting new businesses, regulating the types of buildings that can be built, and bylaw services, as well as communication and announcements from the city, cultural facilities programs, and to a lesser degree, streets and sidewalks. And then finally, when it comes to most service areas, the general preference is to maintain current service levels. We saw that attracting new businesses and employers was the only service area where the majority felt there should be an increase. But when it comes to funding preferences, it really is highly dependent upon the service, and there's not a lot of consensus there.
Thanks, Mary, for the presentation. So there's a tremendous amount of information in this report. Our next steps are to take this information back to staff, and it really informs our annual business plans, including our operating plan. So how we make decisions about day-to-day operations. But then it's feeding into the development of council strategic plan, as I mentioned earlier. With Mary still on the line, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that council may have, or comments the council may have regarding the results of the survey.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Definitely a lot of numbers to absorb, and a lot of things that will help us in our future planning. So I'll start a speakers list. First off with Councilor Carreras.
Thank you. I have a quick question around the timing of this. This is the first time the survey was done during the election period. It's never been during an election period before. And I'm just curious how much that would impact the outcome of the survey when we're all sitting there yelling at each other when we're all doing wrong.
For historical context, we've actually conducted the survey slightly prior to elections.
Yes, because the election was in November the last time you did it. So when you
Yes.
did September, it was too much prior.
So that's a bit of historical context. But Mary, I'll actually throw things to you as to what you've seen in terms of the industry and other municipalities with running the survey at that period of time.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's really difficult to quantify how it would impact it because you just don't know. We did have a slightly lower response rate this year, as you saw, so we could surmise that that might have had an impact, but we can't definitively say that was the reason. We also noticed just ourselves as a research firm that the last half of 2022 on a lot of our different surveys where we were going out to members of the general public had lower response rates, and we also had some delays from Canada Post, and we actually increased the survey period while we were in field, where we left the survey open longer, even though just because we felt that mail might not have arrived. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but I don't know if anecdotally, and this is just, this isn't gospel by any means, but municipal elections don't have the largest turnout. Unfortunately, we wish they had larger turnouts. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure-
it's a reality.
yeah. So I'm not sure how much it would have impacted the survey itself. In fact, in some ways, you could argue that it might actually improve it, because now people are starting to think, they see the signs posted like, oh yeah, an election's coming up. So it's on their minds. So when they see something come in the mail about, with the city's logo on it, they might actually open it. So, you could argue it could go either way. But yeah, it's tough to quantify.
Curious for 4 years from now, because the election shifted, do we need to shift the timing of our survey in an election year? Just quickly on the survey itself, so it was mailed out to 4,200 people, and I'm assuming it's a mix of homeowners and non-homeowners.
The
Yeah,
mail out,
it's the most up-to-date Canada Post listings we can get, and it's pretty current, like it's very current, and everyone had an equal chance of getting pulled.
Okay.
Whether you're a homeowner, non-homeowner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of course we mail it, we don't know, so I'm just assuming there's a
it's
variety.
mailed to a residence,
Yeah.
and there's an opportunity for any owner or occupant to respond to the survey. There's
Okay,
no
so that could impact the do not knows when it comes to tax dollar for value, because they may not know what the tax is for that property.
That's correct.
Okay, I think, and also just sort
Go
of,
ahead.
can I ask one more? I'm really sorry. Quickly, and they'll be done. I'm just curious if there was any sort of expansion on the homeless piece and the safe community piece. Safe community means a variety of things to so many different people. It's like someone's speeding down my street, or, a sidewalk, or it can be the crime piece, or, homelessness. Most people may mark it as a top priority, but again, it's like, what do we do to help? And it's not a negative. It's just, this is a reality. Like, was there any expansion from folks on those two pieces and what that meant to them?
Well, the results to those particular questions were open-ended questions. So yeah, they are very nuanced. And for the purposes of trying to get your head around such a large amount of data, you can imagine reading through 643 individual comments. We do group them up into to the categories. So it does lose a little bit of nuance, but Dan, I believe we provided you with the verbatim
right.
responses. So
We do raw data, and we will be undertaking some analysis to get a little bit deeper into the detail as to some of the responses. But again, for the purposes of summarizing the results of 642 or 43 submissions, we do categorize them in such.
That would be of interest to me, and to what, because there's such vast topics, right?
Yes.
What does that mean? And that's obviously not for today, but, be curious at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to Councillor Schiller, followed by Councillor Tan, followed by Councillor Youssef.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary, for the presentation. And, for me, one thing I found interesting was just to see the changes over time. I found that useful. I did just want to highlight the piece about communications, that being an area where maybe people are looking for an increase in service. And I know we're taking steps to address that. And I look forward to seeing that continue. In my opinion, I think a lot of times there's some good stuff happening here at the city, but we're not always letting people know about it. So I think that's maybe something that is just a sort of an easier one for us to address than other things there. Sort of following along with Councillor Carreras, I just had a couple of questions about some of the answers that were given. Can somebody help me understand when it's identified that they'd like to see changes to the way that the city is regulating types of buildings? I just wasn't really sure what that meant.
So we do provide a little bit of an informational note within the survey itself, that what we're intending to talk about or to get feedback on is zoning regulations, general development, and commentary with regard to how we develop as a community. So that's what's captured within that particular service area that we mentioned.
Okay. So whether people were sort of supporting the direction the city was going with zoning or not, that would all sort of be captured under that same.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a number of different services that fall into it, but it can be everything from zoning to development processes in general.
Okay, thank you. And then another specific question about protecting the streams and environmental areas. And can you just help me understand, probably Dan, how the city does do this? Like, is that something that bylaws staff do, or are there other staff that, or pass it down the line? as you
Yes.
see fit? Yes.
Well, I guess there's two ways. We have a watercourse development permit and we have a natural features development permit.
Right.
So if we're going through a rezoning process, we'll take dedication as a condition of zoning. It also regulates where property can be developed in proximity to the creek, and it triggers all sorts of things. We have tree protection bylaw. So we do have regulation in place, and we also have bylaw enforcement as well. So if we get complaints, we have an environmental enforcement type person that's in the planning department, and our bylaw staff will also go out and take a look if there's complaints.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think
Thank
I'm
you. Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair, I have 3 questions. The first one, I was curious to see that climate change wasn't mentioned in the summary of results provided. Was that an option in all of the survey? Did you see survey respondents alluding to climate change and their satisfaction with city performance?
Well, are you referring to a particular question? Because in the open-ended questions, we're just grouping up the themes that have come up. So if you're thinking about which question are you referring to in particular?
So I'm referring to the results in general, and forgive me if there was something that I missed there. I just wasn't through either any of the sections. I didn't really see much mention to whether it was in the vision of the community or in other sections.
Yeah. So those questions, we group up what respondents are saying. If enough people had mentioned climate change, then we would have created a theme and a category for it, and it would have been on the screen. Now, if we only showed the top responses, so I can't say definitively nobody mentioned it because I don't have the full report in front of me, but I don't believe we had a lot of people saying climate change. But remember too, the survey is in the context of the municipality or the city, sorry. So we've said to them, we want you to think about Maple Ridge. And climate change oftentimes is certainly as an issue tends to be a more of a global issue that will come up. So we've sort of framed and given people a lens just by saying this is a City of Maple Ridge survey. So to me, it's not particularly surprising it didn't come up because people are thinking about their community and probably less about some of the more global issues. And for Maple Ridge, a huge one, well, I don't have to tell you, is growth, right? So
right. So it could be that folks aren't seeing it as a local issue; they're just seeing it as something other levels of government will be taking care of. Okay, well,
it's certainly not making the list when we group up comments. So yeah, it in the context of what am I worried about or what am I thinking about about my community? Yeah.
Gotcha.
Didn't come up.
Thank you. The other one, another question I was curious about was about the age spread in respondents here, and I think I understood that in terms of how we promoted the survey to residents, it was through the Canada Post mailing list. And I'm just looking at the age distribution and the home ownership distribution of the respondents here. I'm seeing with something like 13% less than 35 years old, something like 78% homeowner. And I know that engaging with folks who are renters and folks who are younger is a challenge across community engagement more broadly, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how we can broaden that respondent base.
Yeah, well, couple things on that. First of all, the data is weighted to household maintainers as opposed to all residents, which makes sense in a survey like this because you really are going, you're talking to the heads of households, right? If you have a household with 4 people and 2 are adult children, you really are 95% of the time hearing from one of let's say the parents as opposed to those adult children. So household maintainers make so much more sense for a survey like this. Those are your taxpayers, number one. Number 2, it is tough on a municipal survey like this to hear from the younger folks. In the past, we always had an overabundance of people 65 plus answer. This year we heard more from some younger people. And I think it had to do with one of the things we did is we tried to tweak the prize draw incentive to include some things that might appeal to younger people, such as some gift cards from the Downtown Business Improvement Association, which it includes 2 of the local craft breweries. Dan, I think you can speak to some of the other things you did internally.
So we did push on social media to get engagement from those who received the letters, but it was an extensive discussion we had before sending out the survey that we wanted to engage a younger demographic to show more representative results and be able to extrapolate those results. So we're actively looking at different means of engaging with younger demographics, and it's a conversation that we'll continue to have right through to the next iteration of the survey.
Great. And thank you for that. But my last thought just on that matter is I think the age requirement for the survey was 18 plus. And I don't know about survey methodology. Someone who, you're an expert, you can tell me about this. I wonder if there's I wonder if we could consider dropping it to 16 plus, where, I'm just putting that out as a thought. And maybe Dan can tell me more about that later. But just moving on to the next one. I think my last question is around how increases or service level increases should be funded. And I know I saw a whole mix of like taxer, user fees, don't know. I'm curious, Mayor, if you could speak to your experience. Do our survey results differ from those of other municipalities?
No. The challenge for every municipality is in certain areas. Now the areas differ from municipality to municipality where people would like to see an increase. But when you actually give them a little push and say, okay, well, how would you like us to fund that increase? That's when everybody kind of goes, oh, well, I don't want you to, take it from something else. I want that to stay the same. So everybody wants to see an increase or maintenance, but nobody wants an increase in taxes. So your dilemma is the same one that every other jurisdiction faces. The challenge is to find the ones that are that people are really most concerned about. And in your case, it's attracting new businesses and employers. And then picking the path of least resistance, which is saying, okay, well, we have to fund that somehow. So, you've told us you want us to do more on this area. And so, here's how we're going to do it. And that just comes down to communication.
In addition, we also do engage on all of our major issues across the municipality as initiatives move forward. But then again, during financial planning, we do engage with the public on our proposed financial plan and tax rate increases. And all this feeds into the performance management piece of our business planning process, where we do actively seek feedback on our budget proposals to better understand the direction and the desires of the community.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Youssef, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Centus for the report and presentation, as well as staff for their support and input. As I'm looking at some of the tables and hearing the results, of course, I'm not surprised to hear that we're being compared to other municipalities, especially when it comes to the garbage collection bit, because historically Maple Ridge was pioneering in the recycling and waste disposal aspect of it. And now the region and the province have caught up and in some cases even surpassed us, as well as, of course, having the newcomers that have the recent influx that has come into Maple Ridge from neighboring municipalities and from other areas in the lower mainland has lent to questions like that coming up. Why do we not have the garbage collection like other municipalities? So I just wanted to touch on that briefly. And then again, to the results, I'm surprised to see that the highest gain, if you will, or percentage of respondents focused on homelessness and poverty being a bigger problem in 22 than it was in 21. The percentages jumped, the dissatisfaction or least liked about Maple Ridge has gone down from 35 to 27, meaning that there are more people that are dissatisfied, correct?
Actually, on the table that you're referring to, which is what do I least like about living in Maple Ridge, in 2020, 35% mentioned homelessness, poverty. In 2022, fewer did. 27% mentioned homelessness, poverty. Now, that said, it's still the number one issue. It's
Okay,
just,
so I'm glad I was reading that backwards and I was wrong.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
And of course, I was thinking to try to correlate that, and Mr. Olivier may be able to shed some more light on this. How does that correlate with the CSO program? As I understand, Maple Ridge was a pilot project. We do have one of the first models in BC, if not in Western Canada as a whole. And how is that translated into the numbers that we're seeing, if you could?
Trying to make strong correlations at this point is challenging when we don't see the data and the public perception of the correlation between the community social safety actions as well as the reduction in homelessness. But we did introduce that program prior to 2020. So there is evidence here that there has been a reduction since the introduction of that program, those initiatives, as well as the community safety officers in our community. So while we can't directly tie the two together, there is definitely evidence here that there is an impact being made.
Thank you for that. And through the chair, would the improvements that were mentioned to the bylaw services being provided by the city, would that be a component of it, or is that sort of a standalone and this is more focused on the business licensing and other bylaw services that the city provides?
So the community safety officers are captured under bylaw services in its current format. And so we, based on the results that we see, we could say that that really that measurement captures their service as well. So
The only thing I might add is people may not naturally understand or realize that community safety officers are part of the bylaw officers group. So it's difficult to say. I would say they would be more likely to think that they were part of the community safety, even though they are in fact in the bylaws department.
And I wonder if that would actually change some of the results we're seeing once people correlate the two, because we've received great reviews on the community safety, social safety initiative and the CSO program that came of it. And then to see the numbers here, especially focusing on bylaw services going forward, is a consideration that I wanted to look at. As we see, of course, on the table of desired future community for Maple Ridge, many of these, if I may, through the chair to staff, can be addressed to a certain extent when we're looking at area plans. We can address the issues of not having jobs, for example, places to shop and restaurants. We can address the safety component as well by providing that life to our neighborhoods and communities. I'm thinking of not just area plans, but even as we were speaking to last week, when it comes to regulation of the types of buildings that we're putting in. So when we're putting multi-story buildings in, maybe we should consider requiring some commercial space to meet the requirements of providing that job opportunity, having the ability to shop locally, and of course, providing that life and eyes on the street, if you will. Also, when we're talking about regulation of the buildings that we're putting in, I believe Maple Ridge, with this council being bold and innovative and not shying away from taking on new things and thinking outside the box, maybe we ought to consider also implementing certain environmental measures for multi-story buildings that we're attracting more and more of and that are going into our community and coming in new, by rainwater harvesting, having some requirements for solar panels for a certain degree of power generation. I'll leave that to the experts into engineering to figure out where the numbers are. But even going a step further into when we're talking about subdivisions that are coming in, maybe we can look at a policy where, for example, 5 single-family subdivision would trigger a certain square footage of commercial space to go with it. And then as that expands, of course, so does the commercial space. So maybe in one subdivision, there could be a neighborhood or a corner store. And then in another, it would lend to a strip mall going in or something more substantial, as ways for us as the city to address some of these concerns. And those are kind of my thoughts on some of the results that we're seeing here. For community spirit and moving forward, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight some of the efforts that have been going into our community spirit as well as economic development. Recently, I heard a radio advertisement for Maple Ridge sponsored by the Downtown BIA. And that was the first that I've heard of that. So I wanted to mention that and recognize both staff, Chamber of Commerce and Downtown BIA that have worked to put that together. Lastly, Mr. Chair, I wanted to, again, just briefly touch on the dissatisfaction with our video streaming. I understand that we're not the most exciting show in town and we don't have enough drama and excitement to compete with other streaming services. But is there or was there any input as to how to better reach our client base, in this case, our municipality? I understand YouTube is a new addition to our platforms. Are we getting the word out that we have the ability for residents to watch and hold us accountable?
So what we had noticed with the introduction of a YouTube channel for our public meetings is that we actually have a decent subscriber base that's actually increasing on a weekly basis. So we are providing additional opportunities. I do know that our communications department is actively looking for different ways for us to leverage engagement platforms as well as our various communication streams to better engage the community. So we're looking at a number of different facets to do that.
Thank you. I believe that is all, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Duick.
Councillor Dozy had his hand up. No,
Sorry?
I thought Councillor Dozy was before me. No. That's
I
okay.
can't see anything from there.
He's,
Councillor Dode, did you have comments you want to say?
Yes, just a very brief one anyways. Just want to say thank you to Mary and Mike and all the other people that contributed towards this particular exercise. It was a great one in the sense that I don't see a significant deviation from what figures or information that was provided here from what we actually saw on the ground during campaign. One very important thing that actually stuck out here that is very interesting is how the citizens of Maple Ridge has decided to prioritize creating jobs and so on, attracting businesses to Maple Ridge. One can always understand, like I keep saying, that I guess what we need to explain to a lot of our citizens is the fact that we cannot eat an omelette without breaking an egg. If we say we want to do something, or like say we want to improve on services like garbage collection, and we don't know where to fund it from, of course, the money will have to come from somewhere. And the only source of income that we have that is quite significant is our tax base is majority of which is individuals and of course property ownership and so on. It's not really much of business contribution to it. So if we work very hard towards this, that's what I see there as a prospect for development and improvement. If we can work hard to attract more businesses here, that will create employment, and of course we improve our tax base, and therefore will not require more pressure on the individuals that are already feeling overtaxed and under provided for. Anyways, just briefly what I want to say, and I want to say that it's an honor and privilege to have something like this to fall back on whenever we want to make a decision. And I want to say thank you again to staff for making it happen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And now, Councillor Duick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, and really appreciate, I'm a real strong supporter of surveys, and as you noticed in here, between 2014 and 2020, we didn't do surveys. So the council before the last one didn't do any. So the last council said, you know, it's important because it's how we gauge, are we on the right track? What areas do we need to improve? Particularly around the communication side, I think a lot of the don't knows, as was already mentioned, and the least like about Maple Ridge is because we haven't done as good a job as we could reaching out to people. And I'm already noticing we're reaching out more and more, and the plan is definitely on the right track because people are sharing And that's how we get the information out, because sometimes it's a lack of information why we get the answers that we do when it comes to don't know or least like. And a lot of the similar things, if I go back, way back to even 2003, there's still some common things like shopping. Shopping has come up in every election that I've ever run in. And again, is it because people don't really know? Because if you're working out of our community and you're driving to commute, which speaks to the jobs, and then you come back, you don't have the time necessarily to go around and see that we actually have a lot of opportunities here. It's just, you have to have the time to go to various different places to get what you need. You don't get to just go to one centralized location. So it's great information. I think it's really helpful for us. I really want to encourage that we continue to do this, because it is a really good way of knowing, are we on the right track? And the timing piece, I agree. Originally it was because elections were the third Saturday of November, and then when that was moved up, there is a bit of an overlap there. So I don't know if staff can maybe look at that and see what they recommend. I'm not sure that it correlates, but it is distracting when you're trying to run an election and trying to get people to do surveys and get out and vote. And as we know, low voter turnout this time. I'm even though I don't like the low survey response, the fact that other communities experience the same thing, perhaps it's just people are tired of online and Zoom after COVID. There could be a whole host of reasons why people didn't participate. So thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to round two, I'll throw in my comments and questions. The one thing that haven't been talked about here is we're really coming out of COVID. So I'm wondering if there's any trends or any kind of feedback that especially when we're talking about municipal services, do we have anything that other municipalities are seeing similar trends when it comes to dissatisfaction in municipal services, especially coming out of COVID? Is there anything we can?
So I will actually refer to Mary for context as to what the other municipalities are experiencing. However, I will mention that in 2020, for that survey, we added some additional questions as a one-off to gauge public perceptions with the city's response on the COVID-19 pandemic. And our response rate on communications, as well as just performance with a number of different functions, came back quite positive. That was looked as a one-off. We couldn't include all questions within this survey for fear of attrition and losing more participants. Having said that, we are looking at other ways of collecting that data. But Mary, I'll look to you for a bit more context with other municipalities.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have anything definitive that links COVID to survey responses and response rates. Although we do see that when we survey businesses, that a certain proportion of them say they're still feeling the effects of COVID. That several of there's a large, not a large number, but it varies depending where you are. But anywhere from a quarter to a third saying that they're still feeling the effects of COVID. Whether it's a shortage of employees or just not being able to get back on their feet. So how that might permeate into the residential perspective, it's hard to say, but it's still there as an impact. It's just we don't have anything definitive to say this is how it's impacted the results that you're seeing right now.
Okay, I think it's important to highlight that, because a lot of municipalities were kind of shut down. They were doing their hybrid meetings, or they weren't doing meetings, and this is across the country. And it would be interesting to see how much of that really played into the narrative of that, right? So not a lot of information was flowing other than COVID. Right, so it would be interesting to see if we can figure that piece out. Okay, second round, Councillor Carreras, followed by Councillor Youssef.
Thank you. I had a little note here, youth in a circle. So thank you, Councillor Tan, for bringing up the youth piece. And I do just want to echo that. I think in the next round, we need to go out and find a way of engaging with, like, I'm talking under 30 here, like 15-year-olds, maybe under 26 is considered youth. But you know, I know there was a lot of mention around the taxpayer piece, but they're all citizens and they're all users. So we do need to find a way. And it is true. If a survey comes to my house, I'm the one that fills it out, not my 17-year-old or my 21-year-old. And so I think we just need to find a different way to engage them, because if we really want to think about those cities for the future and what we need going forward, in particular when Councillor Tan talks about climate change and the impacts 20, 30, 40 years down the road, I think we're going to hear maybe a louder voice from our youth who are thinking about where am I in 20, 30, 40 years. So, you know, whether that's going to, you know, maybe one day we'll have post-secondary that we can go to and approach them, or, you know, lowering the age and approaching some grade 12 students who are incredibly bright people. So just throwing it out there and echoing what Councillor Tan said is let's think a little more outside the box in the next one to see if we can engage some younger folks. Thank you.
Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly touching on recreational facilities and programming. As we're going forward, I hope staff will humor me in looking at a new funding philosophy, not just having growth, paying for growth, as we've recently increased our BCCs and CACs, but also, and of course, that's testament to the infrastructure deficit that has built up and continues to be an issue as we're seeing here with traffic congestion and lack of growth. So not only that piece of it, but also looking at new models of partnering with private sector and provincial or regional bodies to bring in those recreational facilities that we are definitely needing in our community. As well as, of course, tying increases in taxes or levies that are leveled by us as government to a particular project. So our residents are seeing where their dollars are going. And of course, lastly, Mr. Chair, I hope that we can look at our waterfront as a community amenity and see how we can utilize our waterfront to not only have a community gathering space, but also to promote some of our local businesses and to have that sense of community and tie into what we have right here at our fingertips that continues to go unutilized. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to, in addition to what Councillor Carreras mentioned about the youth piece, I think it's really important to look at the piece around home tenure and something I heard Mr. Olivieri and Mary speak to. I'm sorry, Mary, I can't see your last name from sitting further back from the screen here. You know, I think we spoke about the emphasis on speaking to household maintainers, and I certainly see the functionality of that, given that the city runs on property taxes. And I think that, you know, one thing that many of us have spoken to is about this idea of an inclusive city and making sure that everyone's voices in the city are heard, whether you're youth, whether you're 16 or whether you're 98 years old, and whether you have enough money to own a house or whether you don't have enough money to own a house. Because one thing I've heard Mr. Olivieri speak to is that this is a critical piece of data for our city and for business planning. And if that's something this is a critical piece, and then I think it also puts an emphasis on us to make sure we really go out and reach everyone that our city serves. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And seeing no one else, I'll just do one final comment just to piggyback off of Councillor Carreras' comments. I think there's an opportunity to actually custom a survey and send it out to the high schools, because the teachers will make sure that they fill them out, and we'll get a different, when we talk about the future of Maple Ridge, well, we should be including the future of what our young folks are thinking the future looks like. So it might be of interest to actually do a custom survey design just for grade 10, 11, 12, for instance. But there's a captive market right there that we could do. Mr. Hartman.
Not that I want to get the last word in, but I'll take this opportunity. I think that the timing of receiving this report is key. As council's getting into the minutia now of your strat plan for the next 4 years, staff are actively working on business planning, and our capital working committee has busy putting together a list of priorities that'll be coming to you at the end of March. So us receiving this information, I think confirms for senior management and definitely for our director group that we're pointed in the right direction. A lot of the comments that you've heard and been identified in this report around comms is in the process of being implemented. We've got a centralized group. They're out doing council highlights. There's things making that connection back to the community. The other thing, and I'll take 2 seconds here to get on my soapbox. Today, this corporation is launching Engage Maple Ridge, which is Bang the Table, Engage HQ. And so press releases are going out today around another tool that the corporations are using to engage with residents to get their feedback around particular projects that are of interest not only to council but also to the corporation. And so this is launching into Pasarena Park, which is the first piece as staff become more comfortable with this, and we do IAP2 training around, which is the International Association of Public Participation. That'll be training with staff as well as council will be part of that process. So you'll fully appreciate what we do and what we do to inform and engage as we go through this exercise in March with that training piece. But Engage HQ is live today. Again, it's another tool the municipality will use to engage and solicit feedback from residents of all demographics based on particular projects that are of interest not only to council, but actively sitting as part of business planning. So that information will be going out, if it hasn't already today, to the media. So for those watching online or streaming, there's another opportunity to engage with your city.
Not to make sure you didn't get the last word. I actually just want to congratulate staff and the different departments for their improved communication. That is one thing that we're seeing, and people are responding back to us saying they love what we're doing by keeping them in the loop. So the more that we continue to do that, the more that we get to talk about our narrative of where we see Maple Ridge as it continues to grow. So this is all very exciting. Mary and Dan, thank you very much for your presentations. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about next week this week in our strat planning and moving forward. Seeing as how there's no further business, I will adjourn the meeting. Done.